So in our last section, we learned that we can write a ratio 3 different ways with 2, a colon, and a fraction. And we need to remember, even if it gives it as a word 2 or a colon, we can rewrite it as a fraction. Thinking about a ratio as a fraction is going to help us with these other steps we're going to work on today. So we need to remember that what we do to the numerator, we have to do to the denominator. So if we rewrite it as a fraction, we have a numerator and a denominator. And we are going to work on making them equivalent. So to get from 3 to 9, I have to times by 3. 3, 6, 9. And to the numerator, I want to do that to the denominator. 9 times 3, 9, 18, 27 is equivalent to 3/9. So 9/27, because I did the same thing, is equivalent to 3/9. So our first type of ratio we're going to talk about is an equivalent ratio. And it's just a ratio that names the same comparison. They are equal to each other, even though the numbers may not be the same. When we break it down, they have the same amount. So if we have 2/6, if I double both of those, double 2 is 4, and double 6 is 12. So 2/6 and 4/12 are equivalent ratios. They mean the same thing. Our next type of ratio is a basic ratio, and this is just a simplified ratio, right? And if it's a fraction, we can simplify by dividing by that GCF. So 2 and 6 can both be divided by 2. That's their GCF. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. So 1/3 is the basic ratio. That's simplified. And 2/6 is an equivalent ratio, as was 4/12. So they're all equivalent, but the basic one is the most simplified version. 1 and 3 can only be divided by 1. So we know it's simplified when 1 is the GCF. So we're going to do some examples. You are going to have to fit a couple in here. If you run out of room, you can work over in this box at the bottom of your future self ones. So we have flour and sugar. And we're going to make this chart. So we're looking here and we have 4 and 6. This is what we know, everything. So 4 cups of flour, 6 cups of sugar. And we want to get back to this basic ratio. We want to come back and divide first. So we're going to go backwards and then we'll work forward. So we're asking ourselves, how do I get from 4 to 2? Well, that is divided by 2. And if I do it to the numerator, I do it to the denominator, right? This is just like a fraction. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. I did it to the numerator, we do it to the denominator, same thing. So now we're going to use this basic ratio, 2 to 3. And we're going to use that to fill in the rest of them. So basic ratio, and notice we're not just skip counting 3, 6, 9, no, it's missing the 9. So we've got to figure out what it is. So we're going to look, how do I get from 3 to 12? 3, 6, 9, 12, that's timesing by 4. So I do the same thing up here. 2 times 4 is 8. So if I have 12 cups of sugar, I need 8 cups of flour. So now we're going to go from 3 to 18, that's times by 6. So I do the same thing to the other one. 2 times 6 is 12. And now we have flour, so we're going to go from 2 to 20. That's times by 10. So we'll times by 10 on the bottom. 3 times 10 is 30. So every time, so once we started, we went back to the basic, and then we use that basic ratio to say, how do I get from here to here? And then do the same thing to the other side there. We can also write them up and down. So you can choose, do you like a sideways one or an up and down one? It's the same thing. So we're looking here, we know 4 and 6. We've got to get back to that basic ratio. So how do I get from 4 to 2? Well, that was divided by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. Now we have our basic ratio 2 and 3, and we're going to use this to go forward. So coming from 3 to 9 is times by 3. So 2 times 3 is 6. Now we have 10. How do I get from 2 to 10? Well, that was times by 5. So to get from 3 times 5, that equals 15. So all of these are equivalent ratios. Then we also have a basic ratio that can't be simplified anymore. 2 and 3 have a GCF of 1. So we take what we know, make the basic ratio by dividing. Then we use the basic ratio to multiply and say, how do I get from here to here every time? We can also use those basic ratios to compare. And remember, you can also write down here if you need more space. So we have 3 people that ran miles and how long it took. So Wesley ran 12 miles in 3 hours. Hayes ran 9 miles in 6 hours, and Jude ran 8 miles in 2 hours. So we're going to compare and see who ran equivalent amounts. So we are going to divide by their GCF. So Wesley, we're going to make a list of 3. So 1 and 3, and 12 can be divided by 3. So we're going to divide both of these by their GCF, right? We're making these basic ratios. We're just simplifying. So 12 divided by 3 is 4, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. So in 1 hour, she ran 4 miles. Now let's look at Hayes. Let's list factors of 6. So 1 and 6, 2 and 3. 9 can't divide by 6, but it can divide by 3. So 3 is their GCF. So 9 divided by 3 is 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. So we can see Hayes and Wesley did not run equivalent amounts. So let's look at Jude. We're going to list factors of 2. So 1 and 2. And 8 is divisible by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I can see that Wesley and Jude both ran equivalent amounts. So we're just using those basic ratios to help us compare. And then we're using basic ratios to help us make equivalent ratios as well. So 4 to 1, 3 to 12, and 8 to 2 are really all the same thing, 4 miles every hour. Okay, so go ahead and finish and write yourself a note or an idea of something that you will want to remember about this concept.